It appeared that everything had been decided behind her back. The son and his new partner had moved into their mother's apartment, while the former wife was relegated to different living quarters. The mother-in-law arrived with her suitcases and stated with unyielding confidence, "My son and his new woman are living in my apartment now, and he sent me here, to this second place of his. But I'm not as soft-hearted as he is. You have 15 minutes to pack. Darling." She was utterly convinced of her righteousness. Hello, dear listeners. It's a pleasure to welcome you to my channel. I'm presenting a new, captivating story. Please enjoy. Alice had always known that Jana Borisovna was no ordinary woman. However, during the initial months after the wedding, her mother-in-law maintained a distant demeanor, one occasionally calling Artyom to inquire about his well-being. A couple of times she visited with a cake, smiling warmly and asking about his work and future plans. Alice even began to think she was fortunate, that all those dreadful stories about mothers-in-law were merely urban legends. Artyom was renting a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts, not far from the metro. The neighborhood was bustling, but the dwelling itself was decent, complete with renovations, furniture, and even a dishwasher. They split the rent. Alice worked as a manager for a construction company, earning around $70,000. Artyom, a freelance programmer, earned a bit more. They had enough for everything: rent, groceries, and weekend outings to cafes. They lived comfortably, without extravagance, but also without want. Alice dreamt of owning her own place. She diligently saved $10,000 each month into a separate account. Artyom supported the idea, albeit somewhat passively. He often remarked that a mortgage was like indentured servitude and that it would be better to save for a couple more years. "Then we'll see," he'd say. Alice didn't press the issue. There was still time. Jana Borisovna resided in a prestigious Stalin-era building in the city center, boasting high ceilings. Alice had visited once for her mother-in-law's birthday celebration. The apartment was stunning: parquet flooring, ornate stucco molding, and enormous windows. Jana Borisovna proudly guided her guests through the rooms, showcasing an antique sideboard and a crystal chandelier, recounting how she had inherited the apartment from her parents back in the 1980s. Artyom had grown up in this very apartment, and there was another 2-bedroom unit in a residential district, smaller and more modest. Jana Borisovna rented it out, bringing in about $40,000 monthly. This income covered utility bills and minor expenses. The first sign of trouble appeared in November. Artyom came home from work looking glum, sat down in the kitchen, and remained silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "Mom has met someone." Alice was delighted. "That's wonderful. She should live for herself. She's not old yet." Artyom nodded, but his eyes lacked joy. "She wants me to move in with her." "Well, that's fine. And she's offered for me to move into the second apartment, the one she rents out." Alice froze, her teacup suspended in mid-air. "You mean for us to move in?" "Yes," he replied. She says, "Why waste money on rent when we have our own vacant property? Artyom, it's currently occupied. There are tenants. Mom will evict them. She's already warned them, said she needs the apartment for her son." Alice gently placed her cup down. "And what about the rental income? She was receiving that money." Artyom shrugged. "But she won't be receiving it anymore. Instead, we'll save on rent." "We'll save and she'll lose income." "Alice, she's my mother. She's trying to do what's best for us." Alice remained silent. A knot formed in her stomach. She disliked it when outsiders interfered in her and Artyom's lives. However, she didn't object. It was his mother, his apartment, his decision. They moved in December. The apartment turned out to be quite nice: 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a recent renovation. True, there was almost no furniture, just a sofa, a table, and a couple of chairs. They had to purchase a bed, a wardrobe, and appliances. Alice contributed half of her savings. Artyom chipped in as well. Jana Borisovna attended the housewarming, surveyed the rooms, and nodded. "You've settled in well. Just don't forget to pay the utility bills." Alice managed a strained smile. Artyom promised to transfer the money every month. Zhana Borisovna departed, apparently pleased. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly. Artyom faithfully transferred the money for utilities to his mother each month, approximately 5,000 in winter, less in summer. Alice remained silent, though internally she simmered. Previously, they paid 35,000 for their rented apartment, and now they were paying 5 for utilities, yet they had invested over 200,000 in furniture and appliances. The savings seemed questionable, but Alice didn't argue. She simply continued to save money, accumulating funds for the future, for her own home, for independence. In February, Zhana Borisovna began visiting more frequently. At first, once a week, ostensibly to check on the apartment and ensure everything was in order, then twice, then 3 times. She would arrive unannounced, use her own key to enter, survey the rooms, and make pointed remarks. "Why so many dishes in the sink? Why aren't the plants watered? When did you last mop the floor?" Alice gritted her teeth and remained silent. Artyom offered placating phrases. "Mom, everything's fine. Don't worry." Zhana Borisovna would act offended but leave, only to return again later. In March, the first serious conflict erupted. Alice returned from work to find the furniture in the bedroom rearranged. The bed was now against a different wall, and the wardrobe had been turned. Zhana Borisovna was mopping the kitchen floor. "I decided this arrangement is more convenient," she announced without looking up. "According to feng shui, energy needs to circulate properly." Alice stood in the doorway, speechless. Artyom remained engrossed in his laptop, silent. Zhana Borisovna finished mopping, wiped her hands, and looked at her daughter-in-law. "What's with the long face? I'm trying to help you. You could at least say thank you." Alice turned and retreated to the bedroom, locking the door. She sat on the bed, this newly rearranged bed. Orson wept from helplessness, from humiliation, from the realization that Artyom hadn't even defended her. That evening, he approached her and sat beside her. "Alice, don't be upset. Mom just meant well." She walked into our bedroom and moved the furniture without asking. "But it's her apartment. And what are we here? Tenants." Artyom sighed. "Don't start. Mom's been on edge. Things aren't going well with that man. She's just lashing out. Artyom, this is our life." "I'll talk to her, I promise." He either didn't talk to her, or his words were ineffectual. Zhana Borisovna continued to visit. Now she arrived with bags of groceries, purchased on sale, kilograms of potatoes, cabbage, cheap sausages. Alice tried to explain that they bought their own food, but her mother-in-law simply waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it will come in handy. Why overpay for things?" The produce would languish in the refrigerator. Potatoes would sprout, cabbage would wilt, and sausages would spoil. Alice would throw them away only for Zhana Borisovna to bring another load a week later. Artyom remained silent, or rather, he had become perpetually silent. He increasingly immersed himself in his work, his laptop, his headphones. Alice felt a wall growing between them, cold, invisible, yet solid. In April, Zhana Borisovna broke up with her boyfriend. Alice learned of it from Artyom, who stated curtly, "Mom's going through a difficult breakup." It became difficult for Alice as well. Zhana Borisovna began visiting daily, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. She would sit in the kitchen, would drink tea, and complain about her life, about men, about her health. Artyom listened and nodded. Alice sat beside him like a mannequin, forcing a smile. One day, Zhana Borisovna stayed overnight, simply declaring she was too tired to travel across the city. She slept on the sofa in the living room. In the morning, she woke before everyone else, prepared breakfast, and roused Artyom. Alice awoke to sounds in the kitchen. She emerged to find her mother-in-law flitting about, frying eggs, humming cheerfully. "Good morning, Alice." Jana Borisovna chirped. "I've made pancakes. Sit down." Alice silently poured herself some coffee and retreated to the bedroom. After that, Jana Borisovna started staying more often, once a week, then twice, then 3 times. She acquired her own slippers in the hallway, her own bathrobe in the bathroom, and her own mug in the kitchen. Alice felt she was losing control, that the apartment was ceasing to be her home, that she was merely a guest. She tried to discuss it with Artyom. "Your mother is spending more time here than in her own place." "Alice, she's lonely. And what about me? Just bear with it a little longer, she'll calm down." She didn't calm down. In May, Jana Borisovna announced that her central apartment required repairs, that pipes were leaking, plaster was falling off, and it was uninhabitable. She moved in with them temporarily, she claimed, for a month, perhaps 2. Alice understood that this was the end, that temporary meant forever, that Jana Borisovna would never leave. The mother-in-law took over the living room, unfolded the sofa, arranged her belongings, and hung a childhood photo of Artyom on the wall. Alice silently observed this relocation. Artyom helped his mother carry bags, hang curtains, and connect a floor lamp. Alice stood to the side, clenching her fists. Her life had become a nightmare. Jana Borisovna woke at 6 in the morning, clattered dishes, and turned the television on at full volume. She cooked meals that Alice disliked: greasy soups, barley porridge, pasta with sausages. She lectured Alice on how to properly peel potatoes, wash laundry, and iron shirts. She made critical remarks in front of Artyom. "Alice, you've peeled the potatoes incorrectly again. How many times do I have to tell you?" Artyom remained silent. Alice began staying late at work, or returning only when Jana Borisovna was already asleep. She left early before her mother-in-law had woken, but she couldn't entirely avoid their encounters. One evening, Alice returned home to the sound of unfamiliar female laughter from the living room. She peeked inside. A plump woman with dyed hair, Jana Borisovna's friend, was sitting on the sofa with her. They were drinking tea, eating cake, and discussing a television series. "Oh, Alice, come meet my friend, Nina Semyonovna," Jana Borisovna said. "We're having a little get-together." Alice nodded and retreated to the bedroom. She sat on the bed, her hands trembling. She realized she couldn't take it anymore. Something had to be done. That night, she told Artyom, "Your mother needs to move out." He looked at her with surprise. "Move out? But her renovations, Alice. It's been 3 months." "What renovations? She hasn't even started yet. She has no intention of starting. She's settled in here." "Alice, she's my mother, and I'm your wife." "So what are you suggesting? Evicting her onto the street?" "I'm suggesting she live in her own apartment. But she needs to do renovations there. Let her do them." "Alice, you're heartless." The word struck her like a slap. Alice turned her face to the wall, no longer discussing the matter. June was scorching. Alice was losing weight, growing pale, and a hollowness appeared in her eyes. She stopped cooking. Jana Borisovna always found fault with something. She stopped cleaning. Her mother-in-law would redo everything her own way. She stopped talking. Her words had lost their meaning. Artyom seemed oblivious to what was happening. He worked, earned money, and spent his evenings with his mother in the kitchen, listening to her stories. Alice was a backdrop to him, silent, convenient, unobtrusive. In July, Jana Borisovna began removing Alice's belongings from the apartment. First, her cosmetics, too many jars cluttering the bathroom, then books, collecting dust, then clothes. "Why so many rags? You don't even wear them." Alice would return from work to find her belongings packed in boxes in the corner of the bedroom. "I tidied up," Jana Borisovna would explain. "We must live in cleanliness." Alice remained silent. She had learned to be silent. In August, something snapped. Alice woke up in the middle of the night and realized she no longer felt fear, anger, or distress. She simply felt nothing. Emptiness consumed all space within her. She got up, dressed, or grabbed her bag and left the apartment. She rented a tiny room in a dormitory with a shared shower on the floor for $15,000 a month. She sent Artyom a text message. "I need time." He replied 3 hours later. "Okay." For 2 weeks, Alice recovered. She slept 12 hours a day, ate when she pleased, watched television series, cried, laughed, cried again. And then she calmed down, feeling lighter. Artyom called a couple of times, asking, "How are things?" Alice responded briefly, "Fine." He didn't insist, didn't ask her to return, didn't apologize. He simply accepted that she had left. At the end of August, Alice realized that their marriage was over, that there was nowhere to return, that Artyom had made his choice, and it wasn't her. She went to the apartment during the day when no one was there. She packed her belongings, clothes, documents, her laptop. She left the keys on the table, intending to leave. But then she paused. She opened a drawer, took out a utility bill, an old one from June. She looked at it carefully. The owner's name, Zakharova Alisa Grigorievna. She had purchased this apartment 3 years prior before meeting Artyom with her own money. She had taken out a mortgage for part of it and received assistance from her parents for the rest. She paid diligently, repaid the loan, and initially rented it out, but later decided to keep it as a backup. She lived in a rented place while keeping this one for emergencies. When Zhana Borisovna suggested they move in, Alice didn't bother to explain that it was her apartment. Why? Artyom was so thrilled. "Mom's helping. We'll live for free." Alice remained silent. Let him think it was Zhana's. It was simpler that way. Alice paid the utilities herself, from her card through the app. Artyom transferred money to his mother. Zhana Borisovna believed she was receiving rent for the apartment. In reality, it was merely pocket money from her son. Alice didn't object. Let the mother and son think they were in control. Now she took the bill, folded it, and put it in her bag. She left the apartment and closed the door. A week later, she filed for divorce. Artyom didn't resist. They finalized the divorce quickly, without any arguments. Zhana Borisovna didn't even find out. Her son hadn't told her. Alice returned to the dormitory, continued working, saved money, and pondered her next steps. In September, Artyom met a woman named Ksenia. She was 5 years older, were divorced, with a child. Artyom liked that. She was independent and didn't demand constant attention or create scenes. They dated for 2 months, after which she moved in with him. Zhana Borisovna initially protested, but Ksenia was firm, stating curtly, "I need a separate life with your son. You can move back into your apartment, the one in the center. Artyom will help with the renovations." Zhana Borisovna huffed, but agreed. Deep down, she was even pleased. Ksenia turned out to be pliable and easily managed, unlike Alice, who was always sulking and silent. The mother-in-law moved to the city center. Artyom did indeed help with the renovations, hiring a crew and purchasing materials, spending around $200,000. Ksenia paid half. Zhana Borisovna was content. A month passed. Life in the city center settled into a rhythm. Zhana Borisovna met another man, a distinguished gentleman with an apartment and a car. He courted her beautifully, taking her to the theater, showering her with flowers. She blossomed, and then something unexpected happened. The man proposed they live together. Zhana Borisovna agreed. He said, "Then I'll move in with you." Zhana Borisovna was taken aback. "Or perhaps I could move in with you." He shook his head. "My ex-wife is still registered there, but still, let's just move in with you." Zhana Borisovna pondered and remembered the second apartment, the one in the residential district where Artyom and Ksenia were living. She could ask them to move back. After all, she was his mother, they should understand. She called Artyom, explained the situation, and asked him to vacate the apartment. Artyom paused, then replied, "Mom, we just got settled. Let's figure something out later." Zhana Borisovna insisted. Artyom wouldn't budge, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. She packed her suitcases, grabbed her keys, and went to her son's. In the morning, on a weekday while both were at work, she opened the door, entered, and placed her belongings in the hallway, taking in her surroundings. Nothing seemed to have changed, except for children's toys in the corner. They belonged to Ksenia's child. Jana Borisovna sat on the sofa, pleased. They would return in the evening, and she would explain everything. Her son would understand. Ksenia might protest, but what could she do? The apartment wasn't hers. In the evening, Ksenia arrived with her daughter, saw Jana Borisovna and the suitcases, and stopped. "What's going on?" Jana Borisovna smiled. "My dear Ksenia, I'm just staying here for a short while. I've met someone, and he wants to move in with me. So I thought you and Artyom could live in my apartment in the center for now." "In your apartment?" "Yes, it's spacious and comfortable. You'll like it there." Ksenia slowly put down her bag. "So you want us to leave here and move into your place?" "Precisely. It makes perfect sense." Ksenia looked at her for a long moment, then took out her phone and dialed. "Artyom, your mother is here with her suitcases, saying we need to move out." Jana Borisovna nodded smugly. That's right. Her son would explain everything. Ksenia listened, frowning, then handed the phone to her mother-in-law. He wants to speak with you." Jana Borisovna took the receiver. "My dear Artyomushka, I've explained everything. I have a man. I need the apartment. You'll move to the center. You'll be happy there." "Mom, this isn't your apartment." Jana Borisovna laughed. "How is it not mine? Of course it's mine. I gave it to you when you married Aliska." "Mom, this apartment belongs to Alice. She bought it 3 years ago, before our wedding. You were just renting it out until we moved in." "No, wait." Artyom's voice faded. It seemed he was just beginning to grasp the significance of Alice's claim. "Mom, the apartment is registered in Alice's name. She's the owner. When we divorced, she didn't kick Ksenia and me out. She just asked us to pay the utilities and not make a mess. I thought you knew." Jana Borisovna slowly lowered the phone and looked at Ksenia. The latter stood with her arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "I can call Alice if you like," Ksenia said. "She's actually in the process of officially arranging the rental agreement, wants to handle everything through an agency. Artyom and I have agreed to rent from her for $35,000 a month. That's market price. We're perfectly fine with it." Jana Borisovna couldn't utter a word. The room swam before her eyes. She sank onto her suitcase. But how? She never said anything. Never. "She did say," Ksenia continued, "right when Artyom and I met. I called her, asked if she objected to us living in her apartment. Alice said, 'Please just pay on time and don't let your mother-in-law in.' Jana Borisovna raised her head. She actually said, 'Don't let the mother-in-law in,' just like that." Ksenia took her daughter's hand and walked into the bedroom. Jana Borisovna remained seated on her suitcase in a stranger's apartment, which turned out to be doubly strange. She tried calling Artyom, but he declined the call. She texted him, "Artyomushka, I didn't know, forgive me." He didn't reply. Half an hour later, a taxi arrived. Ksenia had called it. Jana Borisovna silently gathered her belongings and departed for her apartment in the center, which was indeed hers, but no longer seemed quite so spacious. Alice learned of this later that evening. Ksenia messaged her, recounting Jana Borisovna's visit. Alice laughed for the first time in many months. "Thank you for not letting her in," Alice texted back. "It's your apartment. I'm just living here," Ksenia replied. "Live peacefully. I'm glad Artyom is with you. You handle things better than I did." "You handled it in your own way." Alice switched off her phone and went out onto the balcony. The city sparkled with lights. Somewhere out there, in the residential district, other people were living in her apartment. Artyom with his new wife, who wasn't afraid to put her mother-in-law in her place. Alice didn't feel envy. She was simply relieved that it was all over. 3 months later, Alice paid off her mortgage early, using her savings and a bonus to clear the loan. The apartment was entirely hers. She decided to sell it. There were too many memories attached. She found buyers quickly, a young couple expecting a child. Alice handed them the keys, received the money, and bought a small studio apartment on the other side of town, new, clean, and free of the past. In the winter, she accidentally encountered Ksenia at a shopping mall. They greeted each other and had coffee. Ksenia mentioned that Artyom was doing well, that Jana Borisovna no longer imposed herself, living contentedly with her man. "And how are you?" Ksenia asked. "Well," Alice replied. "Truly well." Ksenia smiled. "You know, Artyom once said you were right, that he let you down. He said, 'Uh-huh.' I told him better late than never." They finished their coffee and parted ways. Alice stepped outside. It was snowing, a light, fluffy, festive snow. She tilted her face to the cold flakes and thought that sometimes silence is worth more than words. There's no need to explain, to prove, to fight. You just need to wait and at the right moment present the bill with your name in the owner's field.